little bright today. Yeah, and my service is off. All this money for internet and these fancy cell phones. All right, so I'm pretty sure. What's this? So hard to hold on without you. You got other folks out here, other influencers. The Zach Rectors, the Jake Clavers, the Max Averys, all the folks on Twitter, the vets, etc. Kurt's still out there doing content, so it's plenty of folks that I hope you hold on. I appreciate the love, guys. So we're gonna have a tough conversation today. I have this conversation a lot on Twitter, quite a bit. I always told you guys I'm not an engagement farmer. I'm not a grifter, and I don't need my ego stroked. So this is why I don't do high visibility things like YouTube. I have attended summits, but that was by invite and good for networking purposes, etc. And it was fun. I had fun doing it, but I'm not really a fame type of guy. So I'm usually just kicking it, but I need to get this out here because I've noticed that there are not enough influencers, and there's not enough talk of this from fintech companies. They're not being honest with you about the real reason behind lack of significant price appreciation. They're telling you half truths. Okay, I've cited David Schwartz's lack of doing so to him. Right, like I'm not just talking about the man behind his back. I've actually tagged him and told him, like, you are more than smart enough to be able to expand on why this isn't happening, and we know why it's not happening, and you're not telling the people the truth because a lot of you out there may not understand those dynamics behind supply and demand. For so long, you've been told that all it takes is usage, and that will ultimately be the catalyst to narrow the supply and demand window and create scarcity for the asset. The problem with that, okay, is that these so-called influencers and even these fintech companies aren't telling you that as long, and this is going to be a broken record for some of you who have heard me on Twitter for years, as long as there's any company, any fintech, not just Ripple, that holds a significant supply or a significant amount of a blockchain's native asset for leveraging purposes, you will never see an all-time high in that asset. I want to offer a disclaimer here before I really get into this and tell you that I think the world of these technologies, I think the world of XRP, WONT, XLM, XTC, etc., all of them, HBAR, you name it. I've come on here for years, and we've had these discussions about these assets and what I think they're capable of in the future. If I didn't say XTC, that one too, and Zenfin. Shout out to Quincy Jones. But with that being said, all right, I'm going to tell you why these fintech companies having these escrow type accounts or holding a large amount of a blockchain's native supply or native asset in their supply is detrimental to price appreciation. Okay. We're going to take it to the beginning when this conversation was first had with Gary Gensler. 2018, the MIT conferences. And Gary Gensler told everyone at that conference that what a company like Ripple is doing regarding circumventing traditional correspondent systems by using something like an XRP is something that the banking system wouldn't be terribly thrilled about because it could cut their bottom line out. He also went on to say, and keep in mind, Gary Gensler is a 20-year man for Goldman Sachs. So he knows his stuff. Well, much longer than 20 years now, but at the time, I think he had roughly over 20 years with GS. Gary Gensler stated that the banks, even though it's extremely disruptive and dangerous to their bottom line that the banks would want to be involved with what was going on with this technology. He said they want to be involved. He said, in order for Ripple, or any company for that matter, but he did name Ripple specifically, to successfully capture significant market share, that they were essentially going to have to pay a toll. Now, I'm paraphrasing at that point, but what he did say is that they're going to have to give up some ownership. He said that ownership could look like roughly 50% of a blockchain's native asset supply, right? Basically, if you hold a significant portion of a blockchain's native asset in your supply, you would need to give up to the tune of 50% of it to the correspondent banks so that they could be involved. Gary Gensler also stated that if Ripple and companies like them weren't willing to do this, that they would be hindered for years trying to acquire any form of significant market share in the future. Okay. Now, why is that important to what we're seeing right now? Well, it's important because in order to see the type of numbers that have been long theorized about what XRP and any other low-priced utility asset can do, you need institutional money to front run that. Okay. Without large amounts of capital, and look, okay, one could argue, well, you can have a bunch of speculative investors that have a ton of money that could flood their money into the asset. But here's the thing, anyone with a brain that has millions upon millions of dollars is not going to risk it long term to make the price rise substantially and be sustainable at that high of a level long term, with a company like Ripple holding over 30 billion XRP tokens under stewardship in an escrow account. All right, that's not realistic, and it's dumb. Okay, and no one's going to do that, especially not institutions, because Ripple is not a traditional correspondent system affiliate. All right, they are a threat to that system. So you have to realize, in order to see that asset appreciate significantly in price, it's not about burning the escrow. Okay, I think that is one of the worst narratives that I have heard around XRP. All right, well, just burn the escrow and then the price will go up. No, it won't. Okay, you want institutions to see value in the asset that's being held under stewardship in escrow that they can't get to the way that they want to. You understand? You go and you burn it, it's going to essentially say to the top institutional bodies, well, you just destroyed it. Like, well, what do we want with it, right? There's a reason why Ripple is holding on to that stewardship for dear life, all right? And they've already said this is our war chest, okay? They're using it. So part of what you are seeing here is a fight between Ripple and the correspondent system because they don't want to give it up, all right? They don't. Let me give you another gem here, all right, that I think people may want to look into a little bit more. Some people will say that I'm being a conspiracy theorist or that I have my tinfoil hat on when I say this, but I know it's true. Okay, I'm not going to say fully how I know it's true because that's a long conversation, and I want to make this quick. Banks, especially correspondent banks, and the top executives in that world control our politicians. When you see any piece of legislation drafted regarding the crypto sphere, you had better believe that the legislators have been directly influenced by the JP Morgans and Goldman Sachs of the world. All right? There is no disputing that. Okay? With that being said, when you start seeing provisions in legislation like the previous FIT 121 and the present Clarity Act, where they're basically stating, if you're a fintech company, we may want you to hold no more than 20% of the blockchain's native asset that you are leveraging and holding in your supply, whether that be your personal supply or whether that be an escrow, right? Now, here's the thing. You can have stewardship over it and you can own more than 20% of it, but guess what happens if you do? It now becomes constituted as a security. And how much more difficult would that make all of these end goals regarding interoperability and utility to be implemented. Who do you think told Congress to do that? Do you think Congress is even smart enough to come up with that on there? Let's be honest, all right? They don't know enough about the space to draft legislation regarding a blockchain's native asset from a supply perspective regarding what a fintech company can hold, because they don't understand enough regarding the correspondent system's bottom line. They do what they're told, okay? And if we haven't learned by now that the central banks and the top correspondent entities control everything globally, then we are in sad shape as a society, okay? So what is it going to take for these lower priced utility assets to go up in price and have a store value narrative and proposition attached to them so that you see institutional money flood in and hold it for dear life long term? I'll tell you what it's going to take. It's going to take exactly what Gary Gensler told all of us it was going to take in 2018. The banks are going to be able at some point to have control over those assets and prevent an outlier style fintech company from being able to monopolize and use it to their advantage and then potentially circumvent the correspondent system as a whole. In layman's terms, banks want more crypto. They can't control the chain, but if they can control more of the supply regarding the asset that is responsible for moving value on the rails that they can't fully control, then in essence, they have a form of control. It's not even so much about they want a ton of it so that they can get rich. They want a ton of it so that they can't be shut out, all right? And then they'll reap the benefits from manipulating the crypto once they have enough of the supply, and they can prevent Ripple, Zenfin, or any other company out there that holds a significant amount of tokens or coins within their personal supply. When you see that happen, and look, you have folks out here that will tell you, oh, it's already been pre-allocated. That's a theory that several of us have, but it hasn't gone into effect yet. Okay, you will know when it goes into effect because you will start to see institutional money flood in with confidence because they'll finally feel safe to dip their toe in the water. You understand? What you'll likely see happen in the future at some point, and I could be 100% wrong, but when there finally is an agreement reached or it's placed in legislation to force these companies to give up a certain amount of their supply, and they do it, that's not going to be the only catalyst to price appreciation. Obviously, DeFi, collateralization, tokenization, all of that stuff will also add to it. But to see, like I said, the store value proposition attached to these assets, you will need to see it reallocated regarding a company's supply of that crypto over to the correspondent system. And when the correspondent system has their share, it'll be a dog whistle to all of the other institutional bodies regarding VCs, regarding other banks that lie underneath them that will need to essentially adopt this technology to be able to interoperate with some of these other larger systems, okay? All sorts of institutional bodies and payment service providers and everyone that you could think of, even your top retail companies and e-commerce giants will start flooding in at that point, okay? The reason why I always say this to people, well, Bitcoin doesn't have any utility and look at its price. Yeah, because even though I feel like the mining pools have somewhat of a potentially centralized aspect to it regarding control, the supply is not centralized, right? Like it's not, they're outside of what MicroStrategy is doing, which is relatively recent. The Bitcoin for a long time, what was on the open market was available, right? You didn't have, some Wahoo company off to the side hoarding over, 50 million Bitcoin and never releasing it to the market, like as far as permanently, right? Like large amounts of it. So with that being said, what I'm getting at is it was a lot easier for institutional bodies not only to acquire but to manipulate and control price action and shorts and longs regarding the asset, and that's what they wanted. right? And that's why you saw the price go up, because that institutional money flooded in because they were comfortable with being able to manipulate the asset. You are going to have to see that for utility assets as well at some point. I think the usage will come into play after you see uh, the supply from some of these companies being shifted over to the correspondent systems so that they're not left out. All right. I said this years ago, and I caught a lot of flack for it. And I've said it on Twitter as well. The banks always win. And I know we don't want to hear that, but it's the truth. Okay. And at some point, and David Schwartz, I'm sure he probably doesn't even watch me, even though I know he's been on spaces and Twitter that I've been in. If you hear this, you know I've said this to you before. I wouldn't call it a conversation because you didn't respond, but you saw what I wrote. Okay. I'm going to reiterate this point, just like I did on Twitter to you and Brad Garlinghouse. I think it would help a lot of these investors out here in the retail space if you were just a little more transparent about that point. All right. Let me see. Do we have any more comments? No, it doesn't look like it. But it would be extremely helpful if the top brass at Ripple, the board of directors, were just honest about it and came out and said, look, the truth is, you're not going to see what you're looking for. Yes, let's get this out of the way. The market dictates the price, and institutions could fall under the classification of market participants. So inadvertently, they'd be the ones to push our price up. But you're not going to see that because we hold a certain amount of the supply and they can't control or manipulate it. Now, I have a theory about why they're not coming out and saying that. Number one, they may not want to alienate their potential future customers because there may be plans to sell the rights to those type of accounts, right? I had been saying this for years that escrow can be purchased at some point or sold to other institutional entities. Funny enough, I think it was just this year, David Schwartz finally came out and clarified that and said, yes, this indeed can happen in the future. Now, I don't, because it's a smart contract programmed regarding the escrow XRP, I don't know what that would look like from a market perspective regarding time release and all of those other things. I'd have to do some more digging into that. I'm pretty sure the schedule will probably remain the same until something else happened, right? But I don't want to get into that because, to be frank, I don't know enough about it right now. I've been kind of out of the loop regarding that stuff. I've been extremely busy. Hello. I am not this kid's uncle, but hi. But yeah, with that being said, right, these are,
Kingston, that's not uncle. That's not uncle.
yeah, I'm not uncle, but
Whose car keys are those?
those are my car keys.
It's not uncle. Look.
But yeah, so back to what we were talking about. With that being said, those are the things that you have to realize is that there has to be that reallocation. It has to be official. And keep in mind, you're going to see the regulatory legislative can kick down the road until they come to some sort of agreement on how to get a hold of fintech companies' supply. And they don't want to take it all, right? Like, I don't think they want all of Ripple's escrowed XRP or any other company that holds a certain amount or a significant amount of a blockchain's native asset in their supply. I think what they want is enough to be able to guarantee that ultimately the correspondent system and institutions outside of those fintech companies can have the monopoly and the other companies, don't, basically. And these fintech companies are not going to tell you that they want to fight it because they're scared you won't invest in it. And that's the truth. I think David and Brad and Monica feel like if they came out and said something like that, number one, it could alienate the banks, and then, but it's inevitable. Eventually, institutions are going to have to get involved. That's the bottom line. That's what we're going to. All right. Would they make it a little more painful if they were put out on Front Street by the likes of Ripple, Top Brass, and others? Probably, because they're petty like that. But I also think, like I said earlier, that a part of the problem here is that they're in fear that if they say that to retail, then retail is going to look at them and say, well, then why won't you just sell it? And then it's going to turn into because we don't freaking want to. We don't want to sell it. We want to hold on to it. Well, why do you want to hold on to it? Well, because we're selfish and we don't really care about your bottom line because we're a company and we have to look out for ours. And I'm not even saying that's a bad thing. It's business, unfortunately, you know. And sometimes business goals and needs don't align with retails. All right, and that's just the brutal truth behind that.
Mom, what is this? Stop it.
You said black people are so coordinated, color coordinated. I bet you have on blue. No, actually, these are the shoes I got on, brother. And I actually have on gray shorts. So no. No, I don't have everything blue on. I got blue and gray on. All right, so I got a phone call coming in because I got to leave. We will continue this conversation. Hold on to what I said. Remember it. Don't get discouraged. Don't get discouraged. And I'll see you guys soon. Signing out.